When a desperate young woman offers herself as payment for shelter at a remote Wyoming trading post in 1869, Cowboy Jake Morrison sees something no one else has ever recognized: her true worth. As bounty hunters close in and 3 orphan children depend on their protection, this unlikely family must fight not just for survival, but for the radical idea that home isn't something you earn through sacrifice, but something you deserve simply by being human. Will Zara finally find the courage to stop running and claim the life she never dared to dream possible? The sound of gunfire cracked across the empty prairie like thunder, sending a flock of crows screaming into the blazing August sky. Zara's bare feet slapped against the hard-packed earth as she ran, her torn dress catching on the sharp prairie grass that cut at her legs like tiny knives. Behind her, the voices of the slave catchers grew fainter, but she knew they would follow. They always followed. The year was 1869, and the Wyoming territory stretched before her like an endless sea of gold and green, beautiful and terrifying in its vastness. 3 weeks had passed since she'd slipped away from the cotton plantation in Louisiana, following the North Star and the whispered stories of freedom that seemed as far away as the moon itself. Her stomach felt like it was eating itself from the inside, and her lips were so dry they had started to crack and bleed. She stumbled over a rabbit hole and fell hard, her hands scraping against the rocky ground. For a moment, she lay there, breathing in the smell of dust and wild sage, wondering if she should just give up. It would be easier to stop running, to let them take her back to the chains and the whip and the endless days that felt like dying while still breathing. But then she heard it, the sound of a horse neighing somewhere ahead. Where there were horses, there might be people. Where there were people, there might be food. And where there was food, there might be hope. Zara pushed herself up and kept walking, even though every step felt like walking on broken glass. The sun beat down on her dark skin, and she could feel it burning her shoulders through the thin fabric of her dress. She had lost her shoes somewhere in Louisiana, and her feet were now tough as leather, but still they hurt with every step. The trading post appeared like a miracle in the distance, its wooden walls weathered gray by the wind and sun. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant people were inside, probably eating dinner while she stood outside starving. A corral held several horses, and she could see a man working with a wild Mustang, his movements slow and patient. The horse was fighting him, rearing up on its back legs and trying to break free, but the man never got angry. He just kept talking to it in a low, calm voice, waiting for it to settle down. Zara had never seen anyone be so gentle with an animal that was trying to hurt them. On the plantation, the overseers would have beaten a horse like that until it stopped fighting. She crept closer, hiding behind a wooden fence post, watching the man work. He was tall and lean, with sandy hair that needed cutting and clothes that had seen better days. His hands moved with the kind of confidence that came from years of practice, and when the horse finally calmed down, he rewarded it with a gentle pat on the neck. "Easy, girl," he said to the horse, and his voice was deep and rough but not unkind. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here." The words hit Zara like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had said something like that to her? When was the last time anyone had promised her safety instead of threatening her with pain? Her stomach chose that moment to growl so loudly that both the man and the horse turned to look in her direction. Zara froze, caught between the urge to run and the desperate need to stay. She was so tired of running, so tired of being afraid, so tired of being hungry. The man's eyes found hers across the dusty yard, and for a moment, neither of them moved. He had green eyes, she noticed, the color of pine trees in summer. They weren't angry or cruel or calculating like the eyes of the men who had owned her. They were just curious. "You can come out," he said, his voice carrying easily across the space between them. "I won't hurt you." Zara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This could be a trick. Men said things they didn't mean all the time, especially to people like her. But her body was making the decision for her, her legs carrying her forward even as her mind screamed warnings. She stepped out from behind the fence post, her chin raised despite the fear coursing through her veins. If this man was going to hurt her, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cower. "You look like you could use a meal," he said, and the simple kindness in his voice nearly brought tears to her eyes. The man's name was Jake Morrison, and his cabin sat apart from the main trading post like a secret tucked away from the world. Zara perched on the edge of a wooden chair at his kitchen table, her body coiled tight as a spring, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. The stew he had placed before her smelled like heaven, rich with meat and vegetables she couldn't even name. "Go ahead," Jake said, settling into the chair across from her with his own bowl. "It's not getting any warmer." Zara wanted to fall on the food like a wild animal, to stuff it into her mouth as fast as her hands could move, but she forced herself to eat slowly. Ladies ate with manners, her mother had taught her long ago, back when she was still small enough to believe that being a lady might matter. The first spoonful made her want to cry. It had been so long since she had tasted anything besides stale bread and thin gruel that she had forgotten food could have flavor, could make her feel warm from the inside out. "When's the last time you ate?" Jake asked, and there was no judgment in his voice, just concern. "2 days ago," Zara admitted, then immediately regretted it. Now he would know how desperate she was, how much she needed his help. That kind of need made you weak, made you vulnerable. Jake nodded like her answer didn't surprise him. "Where are you headed?" "North," she said, because it was the only direction that mattered. North meant freedom, meant places where people like her could walk around without papers, could choose their own names and their own lives. "North's a big place," Jake said, and she thought she heard a smile in his voice. "You got somewhere specific in mind?" Zara met his eyes across the table, searching for the trap she knew had to be hiding somewhere in his words. "Why do you want to know?" "Just making conversation." Jake spooned stew into his mouth, chewing thoughtfully. "Most folks who come through here are running toward something or away from something. Sometimes both. And which are you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she held her breath, waiting for his reaction. But Jake just smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something almost handsome. "Both, I reckon," he said. "Been running toward this place for 5 years now, ever since I bought it from old Pete Williams. Been running away from who I used to be for even longer than that." "Who did you used to be?" "Someone who cared more about money than people," Jake said, and there was something dark in his voice, some old pain he kept locked away. "Someone who thought strength meant never backing down from a fight, even when fighting was the wrong thing to do." Zara studied his face, looking for signs of the violence that seemed to live inside most men like a sleeping snake. But all she saw was tiredness and regret and something that might have been loneliness. "What changed?" she asked. "I killed a man," Jake said simply, and Zara's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. "Not in cold blood, nothing like that. He drew on me first and I was faster. But afterward, when I was standing over his body, I realized that being faster didn't make me right. It just made me alive and him dead." The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they wanted to cross. Zara had seen death before, had watched the overseers beat slaves until they stopped moving, had seen children die from hunger and sickness while their owners counted money. But she had never heard anyone talk about killing with such quiet regret. "So you came here," she said. "So I came here." Jake finished his stew and pushed the bowl away. "Built this place with my own hands. Learned to train horses instead of break them. Turns out there's more satisfaction in helping something grow than in tearing it down. And now I'm wondering what you're really running from," Jake said, his green eyes steady on her face. "Because whatever it is, it's got you scared enough to walk barefoot across half the territory." Zara's hand moved instinctively to her wrist, where the scars from the shackles had faded to thin white lines. Jake's eyes followed the movement, and she saw understanding dawn in his expression. "I see," he said quietly. "Do you?" The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with all the anger and fear she had been carrying for so long. "Do you really see, or do you just think you do?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "I see a woman who's brave enough to risk everything for freedom," he said finally. "I see someone who's been hurt but hasn't let it make her cruel. I see someone who deserves better than whatever she's running from." The words hit her like a physical blow, and she had to look away to keep him from seeing the tears that suddenly filled her eyes. No one had ever called her brave before. No one had ever suggested that she deserved anything at all. "I can work," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can earn my keep. I won't be a burden." "I'm not asking you to earn anything," Jake said. "I'm offering you a place to rest, to figure out what comes next. No strings attached." Zara looked up at him, searching his face for the lie she was sure had to be there. But all she saw was sincerity and something that might have been hope. "Nothing in this world comes without strings," she said. "Maybe not," Jake agreed. "But sometimes the strings are different than you expect. Sometimes they're not chains at all, but lifelines." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending dust devils dancing across the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound made Zara think of all the long, cold nights she had spent alone, wondering if she would live to see another dawn. "I don't even know if I remember how to stop running," she admitted. "Then maybe it's time to learn," Jake said, and for the first time in her life, Zara allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she could try. The scream that shattered the morning silence came from the direction of the corral, high and desperate and absolutely terrifying. Zara dropped the basket of eggs she had been gathering and ran toward the sound, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She had been living at Jake's ranch for 2 weeks now, and nothing like this had ever happened before. Jake was already there when she arrived, standing perfectly still beside the fence while a massive black stallion reared and bucked inside the corral, its eyes wild with panic. But it wasn't the horse that had screamed. It was the young boy trapped beneath the animal's hooves, curled into a ball and trying to protect his head with his arms. "Don't move, Tommy," Jake called out, his voice calm despite the danger. "Stay exactly where you are." The boy was maybe 12 years old, with red hair and freckles, and he worked at the trading post doing odd jobs for meals. Zara had seen him around but never really talked to him. Now he lay motionless in the dirt while 2,000 pounds of angry horse danced around him, any one of those iron-shod hooves capable of crushing his skull. "How did he get in there?" Zara whispered, afraid to speak too loudly and spook the horse even more. "Must have climbed the fence," Jake said, never taking his eyes off the stallion. "Probably thought he could ride him bareback like the Apache boys do. Kids that age think they're bulletproof." The horse spun in a circle, kicking at shadows, foam flying from its mouth. Tommy whimpered but stayed curled up tight, smart enough to know that moving would only make things worse. But Zara could see blood seeping through his shirt where one of the hooves had caught him, and she knew he wouldn't last long if they didn't do something fast. "Can you rope him?" she asked. Jake shook his head. "Too dangerous. If I miss, or if the rope spooks him worse, he'll stomp Tommy into the ground. I need to get in there with him, calm him down the slow way." "That's crazy." Zara grabbed his arm. "He'll kill you too." "Maybe," Jake said, and there was something in his voice she had never heard before, not fear, exactly, but a deep, quiet determination. "But that boy's got a mama who loves him, and I'm not gonna let her bury her child because I was too scared to try." Before Zara could stop him, Jake climbed over the fence and dropped into the corral. The stallion immediately turned toward him, ears pinned back, teeth bared in a snarl that would have made a wolf proud. Jake stood perfectly still, his hands loose at his sides, talking in that same low, gentle voice he used with all the horses. "Easy, big fellow," he murmured. "Nobody wants to hurt you. You're just scared, aren't you? Got yourself all worked up over nothing." The horse took a step toward him, then another, its hooves barely missing Tommy's outstretched leg. Zara bit her knuckle to keep from crying out, tasting blood where her teeth broke the skin. She had never felt so helpless in her life, watching the two people she cared about most in the world face down death together. Jake kept talking, kept moving slowly closer, and gradually the stallion's ears began to twitch forward. The wild look in its eyes softened just a little, and its breathing slowed from panicked gasps to something more normal. When Jake was close enough to touch, he reached out one hand and let the horse smell him, just like he had done with Zara that first day, patient, non-threatening, offering trust instead of demanding it. "That's it," Jake whispered. "You remember me now, don't you? I'm the one who feeds you every morning, who talks to you when you're lonely. I'm not your enemy." The horse lowered its head and nuzzled Jake's palm, and for the first time since the screaming started, Zara allowed herself to breathe. Jake slipped a rope around the stallion's neck and led him to the far side of the corral, then rushed back to where Tommy lay bleeding in the dirt. "Can you move?" Jake asked, kneeling beside the boy. Tommy tried to sit up and immediately cried out in pain, clutching his ribs. "Something's wrong inside," he gasped. "Feels like fire." Jake's face went pale as he examined the boy's injuries. There was a deep cut on his forehead, and his left arm hung at an odd angle. But it was the way he was breathing short, shallow gasps that worried Zara the most. "We need to get him to Doc Henderson," Jake said, scooping Tommy up as gently as he could. "Right now." The nearest doctor was in Cheyenne, 20 miles away over rough terrain. Jake hitched up his wagon while Zara gathered blankets and water, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tie the knots. She had seen injuries before, had watched plantation owners call doctors for their valuable horses while letting slaves die from infected wounds. But this felt different, personal in a way that made her chest tight with fear. They rode through the afternoon heat, Jake pushing the horses as hard as he dared while Zara held Tommy's head in her lap, trying to keep him still as the wagon bounced over rocks and ruts. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for his mother, sometimes asking if the horse was okay. "He's more worried about that stallion than himself," Zara said, amazed. "That's Tommy," Jake replied, his jaw tight with worry. "Got a heart bigger than the whole territory. His pa died last winter. Left him and his ma with nothing but debt and heartache. Boy's been trying to be the man of the family ever since." "Is that why he was trying to ride the horse?" "Probably figured if he could break that stallion, I'd pay him enough to help his ma keep their farm." Jake's hands were white-knuckled on the reins. "Damn fool kid nearly got himself killed trying to be a hero." The sun was setting by the time they reached Cheyenne, painting the sky the color of blood and fire. Doc Henderson took one look at Tommy and rushed him into his surgery, leaving Jake and Zara to pace the waiting room like caged animals. The doctor was a small, neat man with spectacles and gentle hands, but Zara could see the worry in his eyes as he examined the boy. "Broken ribs," he said when he finally emerged, wiping his hands on a blood-stained towel. "3 of them and 1 punctured his lung. I've done what I can, but the next few hours will tell the tale." "Will he live?" Jake asked, the words barely audible. "He's young and strong," Doc Henderson said. "That counts for a lot. But he'll need careful nursing, and someone will have to tell his mother what happened." Jake ran his hands through his hair, and Zara could see the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. "I'll go," he said. "It's my fault he got hurt." "No," Zara said firmly. "It's not your fault and you know it. Boys do stupid things. That's just their nature. You saved his life today. Did I? Or did I just delay the inevitable?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke, and Zara realized this was the first time she had seen Jake truly afraid. Not worried, not concerned, but genuinely terrified of losing someone he cared about. It made him seem more human somehow, more real. "He's going to be fine," she said, putting her hand on his arm. "And even if he's not, you did everything you could. Sometimes that has to be enough." Jake looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. "When did you get so wise?" "Same time you got so brave," Zara replied. "We just needed the right reason to show it." Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell was ringing the hour. Tommy was alive, the stallion was safe, and for the first time since she had started running, Zara felt like she might be exactly where she was supposed to be. The letter arrived 3 days after they returned from Cheyenne, carried by a postal rider whose horse was lathered with sweat and whose eyes kept darting toward the horizon like he expected trouble to come riding over the hill. Jake read it twice, his face growing paler with each word, before crumpling the paper in his fist and throwing it into the fireplace. "Bad news?" Zara asked, though she could already see the answer written in the tight lines around his eyes and the way his shoulders had gone rigid as a fence post. "My brother Samuel's dead," Jake said, the words coming out flat and empty. "Cholera took him and his wife both, up in Kansas. Left behind 3 young ones with nobody to care for them." Zara felt like someone had just punched her in the stomach. In the weeks she had been living at the ranch, Jake had become more than just the man who had given her shelter. He had become her anchor, her proof that kindness existed in the world. The thought of losing him made her feel hollow inside, like all the warmth had suddenly been sucked out of her bones. "You'll be leaving," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Have to," Jake replied, staring into the fire where the letter was turning to ash. "Their family. Samuel's oldest girl is only 8 years old, and the youngest is barely walking. They can't survive on their own. When? Soon as I can get things settled here. Week, maybe 2 at the outside." Jake turned to look at her, and she could see something desperate in his green eyes. "Come with me, Zara." The words hit her like a lightning bolt, unexpected and electric. "What?" "Come with me to Kansas. Help me take care of those children. They're going to need a woman's touch, someone who understands what it's like to lose everything." Zara's heart started beating so fast she thought it might burst right out of her chest. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to follow Jake Morrison to the ends of the earth if that's what it took to stay near him. But another part, the part that had learned to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true, held her back. "I'm a runaway slave," she said quietly. "You take me to Kansas, you're breaking federal law. They catch us and you'll go to prison. Or worse. Let me worry about that. And what about the children? You really want to put them in danger for my sake?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Those kids have already lost their parents," he said finally. "They don't need to lose their only chance at having a real family too." "A real family?" Zara couldn't hide the bitter laugh that escaped her throat. "Jake, I'm not your wife. I'm not their aunt or their cousin or their anything. I'm just a woman you took pity on. Is that really what you think?" Jake's voice was so soft she had to strain to hear it. "That this is all just pity?" Before she could answer, he crossed the room in 3 quick strides and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were rough from years of working with horses and rope, but his touch was gentle as summer rain. "I've been alone for 5 years, he said, his eyes locked on hers. 5 years of talking to horses and eating meals by myself and going to bed every night wondering if this was all there was going to be to my life. Then you showed up, half dead and twice as stubborn, and everything changed. Jake, I love you, he said, the words simple and clean as spring water. I love the way you gentle the horses with your voice, and I love how you never complain even when your feet are bleeding from walking. I love that you're brave enough to run toward freedom even when you don't know what you'll find when you get there. Zara felt tears start to burn behind her eyes. No one had ever said those words to her before. On the plantation, love was a luxury slaves couldn't afford. It just gave the masters one more way to hurt you. You don't know what you're saying, she whispered. I know exactly what I'm saying, Jake replied. And I know what I'm asking. I'm asking you to trust me enough to build something real together. I'm asking you to help me raise those children and turn them into the kind of people their parents would have been proud of. I'm asking you to marry me, Zara, and make this whole crazy idea legal and proper. The word marry hit her like a physical blow. Marriage meant papers and names and official records, all the things that could be used to track a runaway slave. But it also meant belonging somewhere, being someone's chosen family instead of just their property. I can't, she said, though the words felt like they were tearing her throat raw. It's too dangerous. Everything worth having is dangerous, Jake said. Love is dangerous. Freedom is dangerous. Hell, getting up in the morning is dangerous if you're really living instead of just surviving. Before Zara could respond, the sound of hoofbeats outside made them both freeze. It was late afternoon, past the time when honest travelers usually pass through, and something about the rhythm of the horse's gait made the hair on the back of Zara's neck stand up. Jake moved to the window and peered out through the curtains, his body going tense as a drawn bowstring. 3 riders, he said quietly. Armed by the look of them. You recognize any of them? Zara joined him at the window, her blood turning to ice water when she saw the man in the lead. Matthias Burke was exactly as she remembered him, tall and lean as a whip, with cold blue eyes and the kind of mustache that made him look like a riverboat gambler. He was a professional slave catcher, the kind of man who could track a runaway across 3 states and never lose the scent. They found me, she breathed. Not yet, they haven't, Jake said grimly, reaching for the rifle he kept beside the door. And if I have anything to say about it, they never will. Jake, no. Zara grabbed his arm. You can't fight them. They have the law on their side. Sometimes the law is wrong, Jake said, his voice hard as iron. Sometimes a man has to decide whether he's going to follow the law or follow his conscience. Outside, Burke was dismounting from his horse, his boots hitting the ground with the solid thunk of a man who had never doubted his right to be anywhere he chose to go. He walked up to the cabin door with the confidence of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. Jake Morrison, he called out. I know you're in there, and I know you've got something that belongs to my client. Send out the girl, and we can all go home happy. Jake looked at Zara, and she could see her whole future balanced on the edge of a knife blade. If she went with Burke, she would be back in chains by morning, but Jake would be safe. If she stayed, Jake would have to choose between his conscience and his life. What's it going to be? She asked softly. Jake's answer came in the form of him cocking his rifle and stepping toward the door. Nobody takes you from your home, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Nobody. Outside, Burke was getting impatient, and Zara could hear him giving orders to his men. In a few minutes they would try to break down the door, and then everything would change forever. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine what her mother would have told her to do, but all she could hear was the sound of her own heart beating like a war drum in her chest. The explosion of splintering would echo across the prairie as Burke's boot connected with Jake's front door, sending it crashing inward on broken hinges. Zara pressed herself against the back wall of the cabin, her heart hammering so loud she was sure the whole world could hear it. Jake stood in the center of the room with his rifle raised, steady as a mountain despite the 3 armed men now filling his doorway. That's far enough, Jake said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made smart men think twice. But Burke wasn't a smart man, he was a greedy one, and greed made people do dangerous things. Stand aside, Morrison, Burke drawled, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. This doesn't concern you. We're here for stolen property. Nothing more. The only thing stolen here is your manners, Jake replied, never wavering in his aim. Last I checked, this was still my land, and you just broke down my door. Burke's 2 companions spread out to flank him, their own weapons drawn but pointed at the floor. They were younger men, probably hired guns, who did this kind of work for the money rather than any particular belief. Zara could see uncertainty in their faces, the kind of doubt that came when a simple job suddenly got complicated. We got papers, Burke said, pulling a folded document from his coat pocket. Legal papers signed by a federal judge, giving us the right to reclaim this runaway wherever we find her. Papers don't mean much out here, Jake said. And even if they did, you'd have to prove she's the person you're looking for. You got any proof of that? For the first time since entering the cabin, Burke looked directly at Zara. His pale blue eyes moved over her face like she was a piece of livestock he was evaluating, and she had to fight the urge to cover herself with her arms. She matches the description perfectly, Burke said. Young Negro woman, about 20 years old, scar on her left wrist from shackles. That sound about right to you, girl? Zara lifted her chin and met his gaze without flinching. My name is Zara Morrison, she said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. This is my home, and you're not welcome here. Burke's eyebrows shot up. Morrison? You married to this cowboy? That's right, Jake said before Zara could answer. Married her 3 weeks ago in front of Preacher Williams and half the folks in Cheyenne. You want to see the certificate? The lie came so smoothly that even Zara almost believed it. But Burke was a professional, and he had heard every trick in the book. Convenient, he said with a cold smile. Real convenient that a runaway slave just happens to get married right when someone comes looking for her. Tell me, Morrison, you always marry women you've known for less than a month. When I find the right one, I do. And what makes her so special? Burke's voice was mocking now, cruel. She good in bed? Is that what this is about? You got yourself a taste for dark meat. The words hit Jake like a physical blow, and Zara saw his finger tighten on the trigger of his rifle. For a moment, she thought he was going to shoot Burke right there in his own living room, and part of her wished he would. You need to leave, Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. Right now. Can't do that, Burke replied. Not without what I came for. See, I got a reputation to maintain, and if word gets out that I let a runaway slip through my fingers just because some lovesick cowboy wanted to play house, well, that wouldn't be good for business. He took a step closer, and Jake raised his rifle another inch. The two younger men shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with how quickly the situation was escalating. Besides, Burke continued, even if you did marry her legal, that don't change what she is. Slaves can't enter into legal contracts, which means your marriage ain't worth the paper it's written on. She's still property, and property belongs to its rightful owner. Not anymore, said a new voice from the doorway, and everyone in the room turned to see a tall man in a dusty blue uniform standing in the entrance. Not as of 3 months ago. The newcomer was a Union cavalry officer, his brass buttons gleaming despite the dust that covered his uniform. He was older than the others, maybe 40, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of too many battles fought and too many friends lost. Captain James Fletcher, he said, stepping into the room with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. And you gentlemen are trespassing on federal territory. Burke's face went white. What are you talking about? This is Wyoming territory, not federal land. Not anymore, Fletcher repeated, pulling his own set of papers from his saddlebags. As of last month, this entire region has been placed under federal protection as part of the new territorial reorganization, which means your little slave-catching operation just became illegal. That's impossible, Burke sputtered. I would have heard. Communications slow out here, Fletcher said with a slight smile. Sometimes it takes a while for word to reach the more remote areas. But I assure you, these papers are genuine and properly signed. He handed the documents to Jake, who scanned them quickly before passing them to Burke. Zara watched the slave catcher's face change as he read, his confident sneer melting into something that looked a lot like panic. This can't be right, Burke said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Oh, it's right, Fletcher said, and that means you and your men are now officially in violation of federal law. I suggest you mount up and ride out before I decide to arrest you for armed trespass. The two younger men were already backing toward the door, clearly eager to be anywhere but inside this cabin. But Burke stood his ground, his hand still hovering near his pistol. You can't do this, he said. I got a client who paid good money for this girl's return. He's not going to be happy about losing his investment. Then he should have gotten his money back before the law changed, Fletcher replied. As it stands now, any attempt to remove this woman from federal territory will be considered kidnapping, and kidnapping is a hanging offense. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Burke slowly raised his hands and stepped back, his face twisted with frustration and defeat. This ain't over, he said, looking directly at Zara. Laws change, but men like your former master got long memories and deep pockets. Sooner or later, he'll find another way. Maybe, Fletcher said, but not today, and not on my watch. Burke and his men filed out of the cabin, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Through the broken doorway, Zara could see them mounting their horses, Burke's movements sharp with barely controlled anger. Within minutes, they were riding away, leaving nothing but dust and the echo of hoofbeats to mark their passing. Fletcher watched them go before turning back to Jake and Zara. You folks all right? Thanks to you, Jake said, lowering his rifle for the first time since the confrontation began. That was some pretty convenient timing, Captain. Wasn't timing, Fletcher replied. I've been tracking Burke for 2 weeks now. Man's been operating outside the law for months, using outdated papers and intimidation to kidnap free blacks and sell them back into slavery. Today seemed like a good day to put a stop to it. Zara found her voice at last. Is it true? About the federal protection. Fletcher's smile was genuine this time. Every word. President Grant signed the order himself last month. This whole territory is now considered a safe zone for former slaves and their families. The words hit Zara like a physical force, and she had to sit down on Jake's wooden chair to keep from falling over. After all the years of running, all the nights spent looking over her shoulder, all the fear that had lived in her chest like a constant ache, could it really be over? Does this mean I'm free? She asked, hardly daring to believe it. Ma'am, Fletcher said, tipping his hat to her. You've been free since the day you decided to run. All we did was make it official. The morning sun painted the Wyoming sky the color of fresh honey, and for the first time in her life, Zara woke up without fear. She lay in the small bed Jake had made for her in the corner of the cabin, listening to the sounds of a world that no longer held any threat, birds singing in the cottonwood trees, horses nickering softly in the corral, and Jake himself moving quietly around the kitchen as he prepared breakfast. 3 days had passed since Captain Fletcher had sent Burke and his men packing, and Zara still couldn't quite believe it was real. Every shadow didn't hide a pursuer. Every stranger wasn't a potential threat. Every sound in the night wasn't the first warning of capture. The constant tension that had lived in her shoulders for so long was finally beginning to ease. Morning, Jake said when she emerged from behind the curtain that separated her sleeping area from the main room. He had already repaired the broken door, and morning light streamed through the windows he had opened to let in the fresh air. Morning, she replied, accepting the cup of coffee he offered her. The simple routine of it, waking up in the same place every day, sharing breakfast with someone who cared about her, planning work that would benefit them both, felt like the greatest luxury she had ever known. Been thinking about Kansas, Jake said, settling into his chair across from her. About those children who need looking after. Zara's stomach clenched. In all the excitement of Burke's visit and her newfound freedom, she had almost forgotten about Jake's orphaned nieces and nephews. When do you leave? That depends, Jake said, his green eyes studying her face carefully. On whether you meant what you said about being Zara Morrison. The question hung in the air between them like morning mist, beautiful and fragile and likely to disappear at the first harsh word. Zara set down her coffee cup and looked at this man who had changed her entire world simply by offering her a bowl of stew and a place to rest. I meant it, she said quietly. But are you sure you want a wife who brings nothing but trouble? All I want is a partner, Jake replied. Someone who'll stand beside me when things get hard, who'll help me raise those children right, who'll make this life worth living instead of just surviving. I don't know anything about being a wife, Zara admitted. On the plantation, slaves couldn't legally marry. We jumped the broom sometimes, made promises to each other in front of witnesses, but it never meant anything to the masters. They could separate families whenever they wanted. This is different, Jake said. This is real law, real papers, real promises that nobody can break but us. He reached across the table and took her hand in his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. I know it's fast, and I know we're both scared, but sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances on something that feels right, even when your head tells you to be careful. Zara looked down at their joined hands, his pale and weathered, hers dark and marked with old scars, and marveled at how perfectly they fit together. What about the children? They don't know me from a stranger on the street. What if they don't want a new mother? Then we'll take it slow, Jake said. We'll let them set the pace. Let them decide how much of themselves they want to share. But I think you might be surprised. Kids have a way of recognizing people who understand what it's like to hurt. The truth of that statement settled into Zara's chest like a warm stone. She did understand hurt, understood loss and fear and the desperate hope that tomorrow might be better than today. Maybe that understanding could be a gift instead of just a burden. There's something else, Jake continued, his voice growing more serious. Fletcher said there might be other folks like Burke still operating in Kansas. Men who haven't gotten word about the new laws or who choose to ignore them. If we go there, we might be walking into danger. More danger than staying here and wondering what might have been, Zara asked. Jake, I've been running from danger my whole life. Maybe it's time I started running toward something instead. A smile spread across Jake's face, transforming his weathered features into something almost boyish. Is that a yes? That's a yes to Kansas, Zara said carefully. As for the other thing, ask me proper. Jake's eyebrows rose. Ask you proper? The way a man's supposed to ask a woman to marry him, Zara said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. I may not know much about being a wife, but I know I want to start this right. To her surprise, Jake stood up and walked around the table to kneel beside her chair. He took both of her hands in his and looked up into her face with an expression so serious and tender that it made her heart skip a beat. Zara, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know we haven't known each other long, and I know this whole situation is crazier than a cat in a thunderstorm, but I also know that you're the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever met, and I can't imagine facing whatever comes next without you beside me. He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. Will you marry me? Will you help me raise Samuel's children and build something good out of all this heartache? Will you take my name and let me take care of you the way you deserve to be taken care of? Tears were streaming down Zara's face now, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of joy instead of sorrow. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. Jake surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the small cabin while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he finally set her down, they were both breathless and grinning like children who had just discovered a treasure chest buried in their backyard. When? She asked. Soon as we can find a preacher, Jake replied. Might as well make it legal before we head to Kansas. Give those children one less thing to worry about when they meet us. Us? Zara repeated, testing the word on her tongue. I like the sound of that. Outside, a meadowlark began to sing, its clear notes rising into the morning air like a blessing. Somewhere to the east, 3 children were waiting for the family they didn't yet know they were getting. Somewhere behind them, the life Zara had escaped was fading into memory like a bad dream. But here, in this moment, in this small cabin that smelled of coffee and hope and new beginnings, Zara Morrison, for that was her name now, chosen freely and claimed with pride, stood in the arms of the man she loved and felt, for the first time in her 20 years of life, truly free. The future spread out before them like the endless Wyoming sky, vast and uncertain but full of possibility. And whatever it held, joy or sorrow, triumph or struggle, they would face it together, as husband and wife, as partners in the truest sense of the word. The children were nothing like what Zara had expected, and everything was wrong from the moment she and Jake arrived at the small farmhouse outside Lawrence, Kansas. 8-year-old Mary stood on the front porch like a tiny sentinel, her dark hair pulled back so tight it made her eyes look enormous in her pale face. Behind her, 6-year-old Benjamin clutched a wooden horse that had seen better days, while 4-year-old Rebecca hid completely behind her sister's skirts. You're not our mama, Mary said flatly, her voice carrying the kind of cold authority that belonged on someone 3 times her age. And you never will be. Zara felt Jake stiffen beside her, but she had expected this. Children who had lost everything learned to protect what little they had left, even if it was just their grief and anger. You're right, Zara said, kneeling down so she was eye level with Mary. I'm not your mama, and I'm not trying to be. I'm just someone who wants to help take care of you. We don't need taking care of, Mary shot back. I've been doing just fine by myself. Looking at the children's too thin faces and the way their clothes hung loose on their small frames, Zara could see that Mary had indeed been trying to take care of her siblings. But she could also see the exhaustion in the little girl's eyes, the weight of responsibility that no 8-year-old should have to carry. I can see that, Zara said gently. You've done an amazing job, but now you don't have to do it alone anymore. I don't want your help, Mary said, but her voice cracked on the last word. revealing the scared little girl hiding beneath the fierce exterior. The farmhouse itself was in even worse condition than the children. The roof leaked in 3 places, the windows were cracked, and the small vegetable garden was overrun with weeds. Jake had inherited the property along with the children, but it was clear that Samuel and his wife had been struggling long before the cholera took them. "We'll start with the roof," Jake said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Can't have the kids sleeping under leaky boards when winter comes." "I can help," Zara offered, but Mary's sharp voice cut her off. "We don't want you here," the little girl said, stepping protectively in front of her younger siblings. "Uncle Jake can stay, but you need to go away." "Mary," Jake said, his voice carrying a warning tone. "It's all right," Zara said quickly. She had faced down slave catchers and survived years of bondage. She could handle one angry child. "Mary's just protecting her family. That's what big sisters do." "You don't know anything about families," Mary snapped. "You're just some stranger Uncle Jake picked up somewhere." The words stung more than Zara wanted to admit, but she kept her voice calm. "You're right again. I don't know much about families. I grew up without one. But I know what it's like to be scared and angry and feel like the whole world is against you." Something flickered in Mary's eyes, not acceptance, but maybe the tiniest crack in her armor. "Why should we trust you?" Mary asked. "Because," Zara said, standing up and brushing the dust off her knees, "I'm not going anywhere, whether you like me or not. Your Uncle Jake and I are married now, which makes me your family too. You don't have to love me, and you don't have to call me Mama, but we're stuck with each other." It wasn't the most comforting speech Zara had ever given, but it had the virtue of being honest. Mary studied her for a long moment, then turned and marched into the house, her siblings trailing behind her like ducklings following their mother. "That went well," Jake said dryly. "Better than I expected, actually," Zara replied. "She's protecting them the only way she knows how. I can respect that." The inside of the house was even more depressing than the outside. The main room was barely furnished, just a rough wooden table, a few mismatched chairs, and a fireplace that hadn't been cleaned in months. Upstairs, the children slept in one small room on a mattress that was more holes than fabric. "The first thing we need is food," Zara said, surveying the nearly empty pantry. "Real food, not just bread and beans." "I'll ride into town tomorrow," Jake said. "See what I can find." "I want to come with you." Jake hesitated. "Zara, Kansas isn't Wyoming. People here might not be as accepting of us." "You mean they might not like seeing a white man married to a black woman?" Zara said bluntly. "Something like that." "Then it's even more important that I come," Zara said. "If we're going to live here, people need to get used to seeing us together. Hiding won't make the problem go away." That evening, as they sat around the rickety table eating a dinner of beans and cornbread that Mary had prepared with grim efficiency, Benjamin finally spoke up. "Are you really married to Uncle Jake?" he asked, his young voice full of curiosity. "Yes," Zara said simply. "Do you love him?" The question caught Zara off guard. She glanced at Jake, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Yes," she said again, and realized as she said it that it was completely true. "I do." "Then why doesn't he kiss you?" Rebecca piped up, speaking for the first time since they had arrived. "Papa used to kiss Mama all the time." Heat rose in Zara's cheeks, and she saw Jake's ears turn red. Their marriage was so new, so born out of necessity and circumstance, that they hadn't really had time to figure out the romantic parts yet. "Uncle Jake's shy," Zara said, which made Benjamin giggle. "No, he's not," Mary said, but there was less hostility in her voice than before. "He's just scared you'll run away if he gets too close." The observation was so startlingly mature that both adults fell silent. Out of the mouths of babes, Zara thought. "I'm not going anywhere," Zara said, looking directly at Jake as she spoke. "No matter what happens, I'm not running away again." Later that night, as they prepared makeshift beds in the main room, the children had claimed the only real bedroom upstairs. Jake caught Zara's hand. "Mary was right, you know," he said quietly. "I am scared you'll change your mind about all this." About me. Why would I change my mind? Because this isn't what you signed up for, Jake said, gesturing around the rundown house. 3 grieving children, a falling down farm, and a town full of people who think we have no right to be together. That's not exactly the fresh start I promised you. Zara turned to face him fully, studying the worry lines around his eyes and the way his shoulders carried the weight of every responsibility he had ever taken on. Jake Morrison, she said, I've been a slave, a runaway, and a woman with no name and no home. Now I'm a wife, a stepmother, and a landowner. If you think a leaky roof and some unfriendly neighbors are going to scare me off, you don't know me very well. Jake's smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. I love you, Zara Morrison. I love you too, she replied, and when he leaned down to kiss her, their first real kiss as husband and wife, she heard the soft sound of footsteps retreating up the stairs, followed by Benjamin's whispered voice saying, See? I told you they really are married. The town of Lawrence, Kansas buzzed with the kind of tension that made smart people keep their heads down and their opinions to themselves, but Zara had never been accused of being particularly smart when it came to avoiding trouble. She walked down the main street beside Jake, her spine straight and her chin raised, ignoring the stares and whispered comments that followed them like shadows. You sure about this? Jake murmured as they approached Henderson's general store, where a group of men had gathered on the front porch to watch their approach with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Too late to back down now, Zara replied, though her heart was beating fast enough to power a steam engine. The bell above the store's door chimed as they entered, and the conversation inside died as if someone had thrown a blanket over it. Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with graying hair and tired eyes, looked up from behind the counter with the kind of forced politeness that fooled no one. Help you folks? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. Need supplies, Jake said, pulling a list from his pocket. Food mostly and some fabric if you have it. The children need new clothes. Mrs. Henderson's eyes moved between Jake and Zara, taking in their linked arms and the simple gold ring on Zara's finger. The children. My brother's kids, Jake explained. Samuel Morrison's young ones. We're taking care of them now. Recognition dawned in the shopkeeper's eyes. Oh, the Morrison children. Poor little things. Such a tragedy. What happened to their parents? She paused, clearly working up the courage to ask the question that was burning in her mind. And this is? My wife, Jake said simply. Zara Morrison. The silence that followed was so complete that Zara could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Mrs. Henderson's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, confusion, and finally a kind of resigned acceptance. Well then, she said at last, let's see about those supplies. The next few minutes passed in a blur of awkward small talk as Mrs. Henderson gathered their purchases. Zara was acutely aware of the other customers in the store, the way they pretended not to stare while hanging on every word of the conversation. That'll be $8.37, Mrs. Henderson said, adding up the total with careful precision. Jake was reaching for his money when the store's door banged open and a man Zara had never seen before strode in. He was tall and lean, with the kind of mustache that suggested he took himself very seriously, and his clothes marked him as someone with money and influence. Henderson, he said, nodding curtly to the shopkeeper before his eyes landed on Jake and Zara. Morrison, heard you were back in town. Mr. Blackwood, Jake replied, his voice carefully neutral. Good to see you. Is it? Blackwood's gaze moved to Zara, and she could feel him evaluating her like a piece of livestock. And this would be the woman I've been hearing about. My wife, Jake said again, and Zara heard the steel beneath the words. Your wife. Blackwood repeated the words like they tasted bad. How progressive of you. Tell me, Morrison, what exactly do you think you're doing? Taking care of my family, Jake replied. Same as any man would. Family. Blackwood's laugh was cold and sharp. That's an interesting way to put it. See, the way I heard it, you picked up this woman in Wyoming and brought her here to play house with your dead brother's children. That sound about right? Zara felt her temper flare, but Jake's hand on her arm kept her quiet. What I do on my own land with my own family is my business, Jake said. Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Blackwood said, stepping closer. You see, your land borders mine, and your brother owed me a considerable sum of money when he died. Money I'm still owed, by the way. Samuel never mentioned any debt, Jake said, but Zara could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Didn't he? Well, that's between him and his maker now, isn't it? Blackwood pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. This here's a promissory note, signed by your brother, for the sum of $500, due on demand. Jake took the paper and examined it, his face growing pale as he read. This is dated 3 months ago. Samuel needed money for medicine when his wife took sick, Blackwood explained with mock sympathy. I was happy to help, being a Christian man and all, but now he's gone, and the debt passes to his heir. That would be you. $500, Jake said quietly. Plus interest, of course. Let's call it $600 even. Blackwood's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Payable within 30 days, or I'll be forced to foreclose on the property. Zara felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. $600 was more money than most people saw in a year. It was certainly more than they had, especially after buying supplies and traveling expenses. And if I can't pay? Jake asked. Well, that would be a shame, Blackwood said. Hate to see those children lose their home on top of everything else. But business is business, you understand. I understand perfectly, Jake said, and there was something dangerous in his voice now. You're trying to steal my brother's land. Now, that's a harsh accusation, Blackwood said, but his eyes were gleaming with satisfaction. I'm simply collecting on a legitimate debt. The fact that it might result in a change of ownership is just unfortunate circumstances. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Morrison, you might want to think carefully about the kind of example you're setting for those children. Folks around here have strong feelings about mixing. Wouldn't want anything unpleasant to happen. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a bad fire, and Zara felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the weather. After Blackwood left, the store remained silent for a long moment. Then Mrs. Henderson quietly finished packing their supplies, her movements gentle and apologetic. He's not a good man, she said softly as Jake counted out their money. Never has been. But he's got friends in high places, and that makes him dangerous. How well did you know my brother? Jake asked. Well enough to know he wouldn't have borrowed money from Blackwood unless he was desperate, Mrs. Henderson replied. Samuel was a proud man, and Blackwood, well, Blackwood likes to see proud men brought low. Outside the store, Jake and Zara walked back to their wagon in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The supplies they had bought, flour and sugar and fabric for the children's clothes, suddenly seemed like luxuries they couldn't afford. Is the note real? Zara asked as Jake helped her into the wagon. Looks real enough, Jake said grimly. Samuel's signature, proper seal, everything in order. But you don't believe it. I believe Blackwood's the kind of man who'd take advantage of a dying woman's husband, Jake said. Whether that makes the debt legal or not, I don't know. As they drove out of town, Zara found herself looking back over her shoulder, watching the buildings grow smaller in the distance. For a few brief weeks, she had allowed herself to believe that the running was over, that she had found a place where she could build a life without looking over her shoulder. Now it seemed like the running was about to start all over again, but this time she wouldn't be running alone. This time, she would have 3 children and a husband depending on her to help them find safety. What are we going to do? She asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the reins as they navigated the dusty road home. We're going to fight, he said finally. We're going to protect our family and our home, whatever it takes. Even if it means going up against the whole town? Especially then, Jake said. And when he looked at her, Zara saw the same determination in his eyes that had made him stand up to Burke and his men back in Wyoming. I didn't marry you just to lose you to the first bully who came along. We're Morrisons now, all of us, and Morrisons don't back down from fights. The words should have been comforting, But as they drove through the gathering dusk toward the small farmhouse that might not be theirs much longer, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that their biggest fight was still ahead of them. The fire started at midnight, when most decent folks were sound asleep and dreaming of better days. Zara woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of Mary screaming from upstairs, her young voice cutting through the darkness like a knife. In the 3 seconds it took her to fully wake up, Zara's mind catalogued everything wrong: the orange glow dancing on the bedroom wall, the crackling sound that meant wood was burning fast, and the way the smoke was already thick enough to make her eyes water. "Jake!" she shouted, shaking her husband awake as she threw off the covers. Fire! They had been living in the Kansas farmhouse for 2 weeks now, long enough to establish routines but not long enough to feel completely safe. Jake was on his feet instantly, his years of frontier living having trained him to wake up ready for trouble. "Get the children," he barked, already pulling on his boots. "I'll try to stop it from spreading." Zara raced up the narrow stairs, taking them 2 at a time despite the smoke that was getting thicker with every breath. The children's room was at the back of the house, and she could see flames licking at the front wall, moving toward them with a hunger that terrified her. Mary was standing in the middle of the room holding Rebecca, while Benjamin crouched beside their bed with his arms over his head. All 3 children were coughing from the smoke, their eyes wide with the kind of fear that came from knowing death was reaching for them. "We have to go," Zara said, grabbing Benjamin under one arm while Mary clutched Rebecca tighter. "Right now. The stairs are on fire," Mary cried, pointing toward the front of the house where orange flames were already climbing the wooden steps. Zara's heart sank as she realized the little girl was right. The main staircase was blocked, and the smoke was so thick she could barely see across the room. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her, but then her mind kicked into the survival mode that had kept her alive through years of slavery and weeks of running. "The window," she said, rushing to the back wall and throwing open the shutters. "We're going out the window." It was a 10-foot drop to the ground below, far enough to break bones if they landed wrong, but not so far that it meant certain death. Zara could hear Jake shouting from somewhere downstairs, and the sound of water being thrown on flames, but she knew they were on their own up here. "I can't," Rebecca sobbed, clinging to Mary like a scared kitten. "Yes, you can," Zara said firmly, pulling the little girl into her arms. "I'm going to lower you down as far as I can, and then you're going to drop. It's going to be scary, but you're brave enough to do it." She handed Rebecca to Mary, then climbed out onto the window ledge herself, her bare feet finding purchase on the rough wooden sill. The night air was cool against her skin, a sharp contrast to the heat building behind them. "Benjamin first," she said, reaching back into the room. "Come on, honey. Trust me." The 6-year-old boy was trembling like a leaf, but he let Zara pull him out onto the ledge. She held him by his wrists and lowered him as far as her arms would reach, then let go. He hit the ground hard and rolled, but when he stood up, nothing seemed broken. "Mary, you're next," Zara called. "I can't leave Rebecca." "You're not leaving her. You're catching her." Zara's voice carried the kind of authority that came from a lifetime of making impossible decisions. "She needs you to be brave for her." Mary hesitated for just a moment, then climbed out onto the ledge. She was heavier than Benjamin, and Zara's arms burned as she lowered the 8-year-old as far as she could. When Mary dropped, she landed awkwardly but got right back up, arms outstretched for her little sister. Rebecca was crying so hard she could barely breathe, but she let Zara pick her up and carry her to the window. At 4 years old, she was the lightest of the 3, but also the most frightened. "Look at me, sweetheart," Zara said, holding the little girl's face in her hands. "Mary's down there waiting for you. She's going to catch you, just like she's been taking care of you all this time." "What about you?" Rebecca asked through her tears. "I'll be right behind you," Zara promised, though she could feel the heat of the fire growing stronger behind them and knew the floor might give way at any moment. She lowered Rebecca out the window, the little girl's weight almost nothing in her arms. When she let go, Mary caught her sister perfectly, both of them tumbling to the ground in a tangle of arms and legs. Zara was about to follow them when she heard a new sound that made her blood run cold. The sharp crack of wooden beams giving way. The fire had eaten through the support structure faster than she had thought possible, and the floor of the children's room was starting to collapse. She threw herself out the window just as the room behind her fell in on itself with a roar like thunder. The ground rushed up to meet her, and she hit hard enough to drive all the air from her lungs. For a moment, she lay there gasping like a fish out of water, but then small hands were pulling at her arms and Mary's voice was saying, "Get up! We have to help Uncle Jake." Jake was still fighting the fire when they ran around to the front of the house, but it was clear he was losing the battle. The entire front wall was engulfed in flames now, and the roof was starting to catch. He had managed to save the barn and the horses, but the house itself was beyond saving. "Thank God," he said when he saw them, dropping his bucket and pulling all four of them into his arms at once. "I thought I'd lost you." "The house?" Zara said, watching their home disappear into the hungry flames. "Houses can be rebuilt," Jake said fiercely. "Families can't." They stood together in the yard, holding each other tight while everything they owned went up in smoke. But even as Zara watched their furniture and clothes and precious few possessions turn to ash, she felt something she hadn't expected: relief. "This wasn't an accident," Mary said suddenly, her young voice cutting through the sound of crackling flames. "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "I smelled coal oil before the fire started," Mary said. "Right before I woke up. Coal oil doesn't smell like that unless someone spills it on purpose." The words hit Zara like a physical blow. Someone had deliberately tried to burn them out, had been willing to kill 3 innocent children to make their point. The thought made her sick with rage and fear in equal measure. "Blackwood," Jake said, the name coming out like a curse. "You can't prove that," Zara said, though she believed it as surely as she believed the sun would rise in the morning. "Don't have to prove it," Jake replied. "Just have to know it." As dawn broke over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky the color of the flames that had nearly killed them, the Morrison family stood in the ruins of their home and faced a terrible truth. They were no longer just fighting for their land or their right to be together. They were fighting for their lives. And somewhere in the distance, Zara was sure she could hear the sound of laughter carried on the morning wind. The letter that would change everything arrived with the morning mail 3 days after the fire, delivered by a postal rider who took one look at the burned-out farmhouse and shook his head in sympathy. Zara was washing clothes in the creek behind the barn when Jake came to find her, the envelope in his hand and an expression on his face she had never seen before. "What is it?" she asked, wringing out one of Benjamin's shirts and hanging it on the makeshift clothesline they had strung between 2 trees. "It's from a lawyer in Topeka," Jake said, his voice carefully controlled. "Says he's been looking for me for months. Something about Samuel's affairs." Zara felt her stomach clench. More bad news was the last thing they needed right now. Since the fire, they had been living in the barn, sleeping on hay bales and cooking over an open fire pit. The children were trying to be brave about it, but she could see the strain in their faces, the way they jumped at every unexpected sound. "What kind of affairs?" she asked. "Better read it yourself," Jake said, handing her the letter. Zara wiped her wet hands on her apron and unfolded the paper, squinting at the formal legal language that filled the page. But as she read, her eyes grew wider with each paragraph. "Jake," she said slowly, "this says Samuel had a life insurance policy. A big one. Keep reading." Zara's heart started to beat faster as she worked through the lawyer's careful explanation. Samuel Morrison had purchased a life insurance policy 2 years before his death, naming his children as beneficiaries and his brother Jake as trustee. The policy was worth $2,000, more money than Zara had ever imagined existing in one place. $2,000, she whispered. "More than enough to pay off Blackwood's supposed debt and rebuild the house," Jake said. "If it's real." "What do you mean, if it's real?" Jake ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she had learned meant he was thinking hard about something unpleasant. "Could be another trick. Another way for someone to get us to lower our guard. Or it could be the answer to our prayers," Zara pointed out. "Jake, your brother was a careful man. Mary told me he used to read the newspaper every night, worried about what would happen to his children if something happened to him and his wife. Samuel never mentioned any insurance policy to me. Did he mention Blackwood's debt either? The question hung in the air between them like morning mist. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter in his hands as if it might transform into something else entirely. "The lawyer wants to meet," he said finally. "Says he needs to verify my identity and explain the terms of the policy." "When?" "Tomorrow, if we can make it to Topeka." Zara looked around at their makeshift camp, the laundry hanging from trees, the children playing with sticks and stones because all their real toys had burned up, the barn that had become their temporary home. All of us, Jake confirmed. "Says in the letter that he needs to meet the children too, make sure they're being properly cared for." That afternoon, as they prepared for the journey to Topeka, Mary approached Zara with the serious expression that seemed permanently etched on her 8-year-old face. "Is this about money?" Mary asked. "Yes," Zara said, not seeing any point in lying to a child who had already seen too much of the world's harsh realities. "Good money or bad money?" The question was so adult, so weary, that it made Zara's heart ache. "Hopefully good money. Money your papa set aside to take care of you." "Papa was always worried about money," Mary said quietly. "He and Mama used to talk about it at night when they thought we were sleeping, about what would happen to us if they got sick." "What did they say?" "That they had made arrangements. That no matter what happened, we would be taken care of." Mary's young face was thoughtful. Maybe this is what they meant. That evening, as they sat around their campfire eating beans and cornbread for the third night in a row, Jake told the children about the trip to Topeka. "Why do we have to go?" Benjamin asked. "Can't you just bring the money back here?" "Doesn't work that way, son," Jake explained. "The lawyer has to make sure we're really the people we say we are, and that you children are safe and happy." "Are we safe and happy?" Rebecca asked, her 4-year-old logic cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Jake and Zara exchanged glances over the fire. How do you explain to a child that safety is relative, that happiness sometimes has to be carved out of the hardest circumstances? "We're together," Zara said finally, "and as long as we're together, we can handle whatever comes next." "Even if our house burned down?" Rebecca pressed. "Even then? Even if bad men try to hurt us?" Zara felt Jake's hand find hers in the firelight. "Even then," she repeated, "because families protect each other, and we're a family now." The next morning, they loaded into Jake's wagon for the journey to Topeka. The children were excited about seeing a real city, chattering about the buildings and people they might encounter. But Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into another trap. As they drove through the rolling Kansas countryside, she found herself scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. Every dust cloud could be riders following them. Every stranger they passed on the road could be one of Blackwood's men. The feeling of being hunted had never really left her, even after Captain Fletcher had sent Burke packing back in Wyoming. "You're thinking too hard," Jake said, noticing her tension. "Someone burned our house down," Zara replied. "Forgive me if I'm not feeling particularly trusting right now." "Fair point." Jake was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, when I first came to Wyoming, I was running from something too." "What?" "Myself, mostly. The man I used to be." He glanced at the children, who were absorbed in a game of counting cows in the fields they passed. "I told you I killed a man, but I never told you why." Zara waited, sensing this was important. "His name was Charlie Brennan, and he was the best friend I ever had. We rode together for 3 years, worked cattle drives and mining claims and anything else that would put money in our pockets." Jake's voice grew distant, remembering. "But Charlie had a gambling problem, and one night he got in deep with the wrong people. They said he cheated them out of $200. Did he? Probably. Charlie wasn't exactly what you'd call honest when it came to cards." Jake's smile was sad. "But he was my friend, and when they came for him, I stood with him. Ended up in a gunfight in the middle of the street, just like something out of a dime novel. And you killed one of them." "Killed 2 of them, actually." Charlie got the third before they got him. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Afterward, I realized that loyalty without wisdom is just another form of stupidity. Charlie was wrong to cheat those men, and I was wrong to help him do it. So you came to Wyoming to start over. So I came to Wyoming to figure out how to be a better man. Jake looked at her then, his green eyes serious. That's what you gave me, Zara. A chance to be the man I always wanted to be instead of the man I was afraid I was. The words settled into Zara's chest like seeds taking root. And what kind of man is that? The kind who protects his family, Jake said simply. No matter what it costs. As they crested a hill and saw the buildings of Topeka spread out below them like a promise, Zara realized that Jake Morrison had already kept that promise a dozen times over. Now it was time to see if the world would finally give them a break, or if they would have to keep fighting for the right to exist as a family. Either way, she thought as the wagon rolled down toward the city, they would face it together.